Good morning. It's hard to follow that. That's a beautiful song, thank you. We had rain all weekend, or during the week, I guess it was my long weekend, but we went to Mount Rushmore, and it was huge rains every night, and then it would be perfect all day. It was just gorgeous, but thank you. Today, we're going to talk about the freedom of ruby red slippers. I have to put my grandma glasses on. And somewhere along the way, I lost my ruby red slippers and I went comfortable. I'm not quite sure what happened, but Troy can even attest. There was a day and time when I moved in with him and I actually had 21 pairs of shoes. I was a shoeaholic. I confess, if they were cute and they went with anything, I had them. And when I moved in with Troy, he went to dinner and I wasn't there, and went to dinner with his ex-wife and a high school sweetheart, and he was complaining that I had 21 pairs of shoes. And they kindly informed him that I hadn't quite met the Highlands Ranch quota. So I was still allowed to have more shoes. But I thought that the topic of freedom for July was kind of a fun topic. But the other day, I don't know how many of you know that I bought my dream car, the Cube. I have the little Nissan Cube that I get to drive down the road in whimsy every day. And it has satellite radio, and I've discovered Oprah. And she's on my satellite radio all the time, button 2. And so sometimes I'll be driving down the road, and I'll hit that just to hear a snippet of something that she's got going on her show, and see what the message is that I'm supposed to be getting, because I believe everything has a reason. And so while I'm driving, I hit that. So the other day I'm driving along, and I hit the button, and it's Oprah talking to somebody about the Wizard of Oz, and that they're talking about the spiritual message of the Wizard of Oz. And I'm thinking, I never really thought the Wizard of Oz had a spiritual message. It had scary monkeys and ruby red slippers. I didn't really think it had a message, but a lot of the movies that we do watch have really great messages. And last night we were watching Shrek. We have a foreign exchange student from Japan, so we were watching Shrek on TV, and Shrek and Donkey are laying on this cliff, and they're talking, and Shrek's spouting out all this great spiritual wisdom. And I was thinking, oh, that's awesome that we teach the kids that at that age. And so then it made me ponder more and more about the Wizard of Oz and what was the message we were supposed to be getting there. Now, if you research it, you find out that actually the Wizard of Oz, the book, is written in the 1800s, but it wasn't filmed until 1939. And when they filmed it, they actually made the costumes and the uniforms of a lot of them look like Russians and all kinds of things. So it's a very political movie when you watch it. But there's also the spiritual messages in it that he originally intended. And I didn't realize that, but as I was researching it, I found out that there were things that he wanted. He was kind of a New Thought person. And of course, the New Thought came about in the late 1800s or mid 1800s, and it started kind of culminating. And so this is part of that. And he was one of those followers, and so he wrote this book about this great story and kind of the girl lost and finding herself. And so there were 3 messages that stuck out to me. There's a lot more, but there were 3 that stuck out to me. And the first one is that Dorothy wants to go home at all cost. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. And no matter what, she wants to go home. She does not like Technicolor. She didn't want to be over there. She didn't want to see the new place. She didn't want to meet Munchkins. She didn't want to be there, and she was so invested in not being there, she was willing to do anything. The second message is that the Scarecrow, Lion, and the Tin Man are looking for their brain, the heart, and courage, but they're looking for attributes that we have in ourselves that we tend to question and we don't trust, right? They had them as well. And the wizard pretty much tells them that in the end of the movie, but they didn't trust it either. And the third message was that it's kind of you got to see it to believe it. Remember that saying they always tell you? You got to see it to believe it, but we turn it upside down, that you have to believe it to see it. And Dorothy had the power in her ruby red slippers to go home the whole time. But she got waylaid on this other path and didn't believe in her own power to go home to Kansas. And so I thought that was an interesting point. As a matter of fact, the Oprah show was actually, they were very upset with Glinda. And so they were having this conversation about Glinda the Good Witch really wasn't a good witch because she didn't tell Dorothy sooner that she had the power in her own ruby red slippers, right? So it was kind of funny because they were kind of Glinda bashing in the conversation. But it was an interesting thought that there are things that hold us back, and sometimes we think we have to see it before we'll believe it. I remember having an argument with my ex-brother-in-law years ago about God. And he said, well, prove that there is a God. And I said, great, prove there isn't. And he sat there for a second, and both of us were at a stalemate. We couldn't figure out how to prove or disprove either way. But I think in a lot of places, it comes across that, prove it to me, then I'll believe it. And I love our teachings are that we have to believe it, and then it comes to fruition. And that's when you get your heart's desires. That's when it comes to reality. In my the studying of it, they were talking about the twister and the tornado and all of this upheaval. And I know that we've all experienced upheaval and those kinds of things in our life. And while a tornado is really not a good thing, it does bring about change. And so that was one of the things that was a constant in the book, is that the tornado brought about the change and that everybody talked about the cyclone. And I thought, sometimes your life kind of feels whirlwindy like that, and it does bring about change. So sometimes you have to embrace that change and not want to go back to home so desperately. Sometimes you have to enjoy smelling the flowers in Oz and walking the yellow brick road and see what's there, meet the munchkins, and enjoy where you're at the moment, even though it isn't where you were. I can attest to that too. I'm not a very good example because this last 3 days that we were in Mount Rushmore, we stayed in a cabin, which I was very proud that I got a cabin since it rained. And there were 50-mile-an-hour winds, so I don't think our tent would have stayed up. And when I got up at 6:15 and came out of the cabin, everybody was sleeping in their cars in the tent part of the campground. But we were in this deluge of rain. And all I wanted to do was go home to my bed, Troy, and my puppies. And in that order. I wanted my bed back so bad. Because we were in this, it was a bunkhouse, literally, that there were 6 of us staying in this tough shed. And so I was done seeing and experiencing all of that. But so I wasn't a very good example, and I was having to kind of laugh at myself and give myself the conversation that maybe I needed to use my ruby red slippers and enjoy where I was at the moment and just chill. So I was doing that quite a lot, and my younger sister was also having to work on it with me. We were both a little irritated. But in Dorothy's journey, we can also look at that as a spiritual quest, that she was on this quest to experience in her life what she was going to experience to take back home. And so she was there meeting the munchkins. She ran into the scary monkeys. She had the field of poppies. So she had all of these experiences on her spiritual quest. And one of the quotes that I thought was so funny when I was researching this was the gentleman that was writing this paper about the spiritualism of the Wizard of Oz. He says, Dorothy is a prototypical hero, very much like Jesus, Buddha, Harry Potter, and Luke Skywalker. In other words, she was out to see the good, and she was out to make a difference and to affect change. And even though she was in a different place, she still fought for the moral conflict. And she did it even though it wasn't the popular way to be. She fought for the moral right. And she made sure that she made everyone aware of it. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting thought. I hadn't seen her as a spiritual person that way, but really she does. If you think about how she fights for the lion and fights for the scarecrow, she wants to defend everybody, protect everyone, and make things right and good, even though it compromises who she was and what her nature is. That she really isn't the kind of person that wants to go out and kill the wicked witch. So I thought that was interesting. One of the comments that I had, one of my snippets of my Oprah, as I've been pushing the button over the last few weeks, was one of them was they were talking about religious and spiritual. And they said that when you're a religious person, you strive every day to be good enough to go to heaven and to stay out of hell. And so you stand on this this fence, trying to be good enough and not bad enough to get where you want to be. And it's this struggle every day to stay that way. Whereas when you're a deeply spiritual person, you actually have probably experienced some hell or a cyclone tornado. And so what you're doing is striving to have heaven on earth every day. So we try to create it here and now, not be good enough to deserve it later. So that was one of the big differences, and I thought that was an interesting comment that really I learned a long time ago we don't believe in heaven or sin. Because when I first met Troy, we were doing a puzzle with his daughter who's been raised in this philosophy, and I found a puzzle and piece, and she hid it, the last piece, and you know how it's important to have the last piece of a puzzle? And she had hid it, and I teased her, and I said, "Oh, you little sinner." And she looked at me, and she goes, "Oh, I don't know what that is." And I thought, what a beautiful thought. That is, as a recovering Catholic, that is just awesome, that she has no idea what sin would be, because it's all in her creation and her reality that she creates her own heaven. And she still, to this day, creates her own heaven, her own car, her own job. She kind of has it wired. And so I thought that was really neat. But so Dorothy tries to get back home, and she goes ahead and she kills the Wicked Witch, and then they go down to the wizard, right? And that's where the other characters kind of really come into play. We have the Tin Man looking for a heart, and we have the lion looking for his courage, and we have the scarecrow wanting his intelligence or his brain. When in reality, through the entire movie, they've already shown those attributes, right? They've already shown that he's the king of the jungle. He is who he is. He's a leader. That's the lion. He already has his courage. He just needs to put it in action. He just needs to believe it. And then the Tin Man, who's already shown that he's capable of compassion, caring, and love, I think in the real world just wanted to be loved. It wasn't that he was looking to love others as much as he was looking to be loved and accepted. And I thought that's really true of so many of us. And then the scarecrow, of course, is looking for his brain because he doesn't think he's very intelligent or makes very wise decisions. How many of us, when we were teenagers, made really wise decisions? I can think of a lot of them. One of the things we joke at our house, because Maureen is 13, she's my niece that lives with us, and Troy would joke with her that she was brain damaged, but she had never really seen Bill Cosby. So she didn't quite understand that relation, and so we decided to change it and rename it. And it is the 13-year-old incredible expanding brain phenomenon. And when her brain is just expanding more than we can handle, we call it a phenomenon. And unfortunately, she matches that to the Muppet music and goes, phenomenon. Na, 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 na. No, it's not funny. You need to think now. But anyhow, we don't think what we're doing sometimes is what we're supposed to be doing, and we question it and we second guess it, and we forget to release, let go, let God, and know that the truth is really there. It's really going to happen the way it's supposed to. This talk is actually my lesson in truth and let go and let God, because I had so many things that I wanted to talk about. I needed to just let go and let it happen. So it's been a test of my own. They say that you live your ministry or your spiritual practices out loud and in person, and it's true. They teach you that all through practitioner, don't they? And you don't really think it until you're living it. So anyhow, with Dorothy and the cyclone, she's fighting, she comes back, she goes to the wizard, she wants all of these things, and the wizard is basically lets them know that they had it all along. We should have never gone to the wizard for it. You needed to trust it, know it, that it was going to be here and it was going to happen. And then with the lion, I don't know how many of you have ever read The Wicked. Have you? I love that book. I love the fact that the Wicked Witch is not bad. She's actually a political activist. I just think that's awesome. That's a nice twist to the book. But what it also is saying is that if that really was the case, that she was the political activist, Dorothy took what everybody said for truth, and she went down the path to get the witch's broom back, right? And I think that so many times we want to listen to what other people say and then that sways us on that path, and we head in the wrong direction. And so I want to remind everybody that's where your ruby red slippers come in. That's where you want to stay on your path, your truth, with your freedom to choose where you're going to head. And I don't know about anybody else, but when the school year started, did you get new shoes? The really bright white tennies? I loved school. I loved when August is like my favorite month. And I loved just new clothes and all the school supplies. I loved it. And so new shoes, anybody, it doesn't have to be ruby red slippers, but when you left and you headed out that day in your brand new white tennis shoes, didn't you think you had the world by the tail? Didn't you think you had it all? You were ready. And that's the same thing that the ruby red slippers represent to me, is that you have it, you have the courage, you can do anything you want to do. So now we talk about Glinda the Good Witch, the one that didn't tell her she had the power all along. I kind of think that's the naysayer. Does anyone have a naysayer in your mind? Is it you? A lot of times it's my little self-talk. Tells me that I can't do it. Some people have other experiences. My sister, my oldest sister, has a learning disability, and she flunked high school. She flunked school, and then had to repeat her senior year of high school. And the counselor in her freshman year told her that she would never amount to anything because she was going to have to work in a fast food restaurant all her life because she wasn't smart. She was too dumb to do anything else. And then told her, oh, I don't think you'll be able to do that either because you can't count money. So my sister went through life with this theory that she was stupid, that she'd never amount to anything. She had no self-confidence. She flunked college. She flunked everything she tried to put her mind to. She got married, got into a bad marriage, domestic violence. I'm happy to say she's a survivor of domestic violence. But through that, she learned she had to battle. Everything in her life is a battle because she's going to have to prove that she's right and she's worthy. So she went back to college, and she's now a 4.0. She has her degree. She's talking about going on to her master's. The Smithsonian Institute is looking at her to put together some programs, which I just think would be awesome. How cool is that to say that you really work for the Smithsonian Institute? And she's a 4th grade teacher. So even when somebody's naysaying, you still have to believe the fight yourself and your own ruby red slippers. I'm sorry. I find what she's done amazing because she's a hero to me. I've seen her go through so much and still believe. And we went to Mount Rushmore together, and she annoyed me beyond annoying because everywhere she went, it was a lesson. And I was like, oh my gosh, let's move on. But it really is. She lives and breathes who she is today. And all I could picture while she was running around showing our poor foreign exchange student everything in the world, and then any child around her explained something and taught them something, and I kept thinking, oh, I need to stop, I need to chill, I need to stop the tornado, I need to let it happen because she's wearing her own ruby slippers, and she's doing it in pride, and she's loving it, and she is who she is. And so I finally had to let it go, and it was a dry week, and there was no wine. So that might have helped, but I thought my younger sister and I were joking that we were whining enough for everybody. We didn't need any more wine at the party. But I had to really honor who she was, and she really does live that dream of who she wanted to be and was told she couldn't be. And the fact that she's been approached by Smithsonian Institute, I want to find out where the counselor is so we can tell her. That's where you get your great joy. But Corinne's thrilled with who she is, and I had to honor that she is an amazing person. So with all of the studying of the Glinda the Good Witch and the ruby red slippers and recognizing all of those spiritual truths in the movie, there were 5 things that I came to the conclusion. One, that we all have our own pair of ruby red slippers to take us to our heart's desires, and that we had them all the time. Two, that while tornadoes are bad, they do bring change. Three, truth is not given so much as it is realized. Looking within, it's in your own backyard. Four, reality is very simple. We create our own reality. And when we tend to make it more complicated than it needs to be, the simple universal fact is that if we believe it, it is so. And five, there's no place like home. The kingdom of heaven is not a place, it's a condition. So in the end of the movie, Dorothy says to Glinda, "Oh, will you help me? Can you help me?" And Glinda says, "You don't need to be helped any longer. You've always had the power to go back to Kansas." And she says, "I have." And the Scarecrow jumps in, and he says, "Then why didn't you tell her before?" And she says, "Because she wouldn't have believed me. She had to learn it for herself." And the Tin Man leans forward and asks, "Well, then what have you learned, Dorothy?" And she says, "Well, I think that it wasn't enough just to want to see Uncle Henry and Auntie Em, and that if I ever go looking for my heart's desire again, I won't look any further than my own backyard, because if it isn't here, I never really had it." Thank you.